Eugenics means the science of good breeding. Is the application of science of evolution to the human population. Managed breeding was nothing new. In fact, in 19th century Britain, gentlemen and also farmers made a practice of breeding pigeons to produce different body types. Darwin himself participated in this practice, and he learned from it that by the conscious application of breeding practices, you could produce different kinds of pigeons. He suggested that nature and not people could do this selection, and from this idea he moved to the idea of natural selection and the evolution of the species. His cousin Francis Darwin reversed this form and suggested that natural selection would be replaced by artificial selection. That is, people could control the process of breeding. Galton moved from asking this question about pigeons to asking the question about people, or could the hereditary traits of pigeons also be seen in people? He asked, what is it that was hereditary? Are physical traits hereditary? Is height hereditary? Is beauty? What about individual things like character? How about intelligence? Is height inherited? And if so, how would you tell? After all, height occurs on a spectrum, and everybody has it. So what does it mean to say that height runs in the family? Indeed, almost nobody is the same height as their mother or father. So how do you say that there is some kind of hereditary connection between one and the other? In 1865, Galton found that numerous human traits ran in families. Among these, he noticed, were tuberculosis, longevity, madness, susceptibility to the poisonous effects of opium, gregariousness, aversion to meat, craving for drink, gambling, strong sexual passion, proclivity for pauperism, crimes of violence, and fraud. Even today, we notice that if you look at the British population over hundreds of years, we see that wealth is a hereditary trait. That is to say, if your ancestors 1,000 years ago were wealthy, there's a very good chance that you're wealthy as well. In fact, wealth is more hereditary in Britain than height is. Galton's studies depended on prior science and a new technology in the 19th century. This was a new science that connected character traits to the body, and another science that gave techniques for measurement of those traits. Phrenology was a cutting-edge and highly popular neuroscience of the 19th century. Its history falls into a few periods. The first, extending roughly from the mid-1790s to the 1810s, saw only the Germans as practitioners and advocates of the science. Then phrenology moved to Britain and spread to America and to France in the 1830s and 1840s. Then it was reintroduced to Germany. It became far more successful in America. Phrenology died away in Britain in the early 1850s, but a new movement was reintroduced to Britain by the Americans in the 1860s and 1870s. Phrenology had a wide range of uses. It served as a tool for career planning, as a tool for psychotherapy, as a tool for medicine, for education, and for criminology. Phrenology operated with a set of significant principles. The first was that people are different. The second is that the soul is not a single undivided thing, but it's made up of parts. Third, phrenology held that people are different, and they're different not like apples and oranges are different in every single aspect. They're different because the parts of their soul are different. Further, third, the parts of the soul and the character are located in individual parts of the brain. These parts of the brain are like organs, sort of like the heart, the lungs, and the liver. Exercise of these brain organs make them grow bigger and stronger. Sixth, the growth of the organs is detectable on the outside of the head, just as with exercise, people's bodies change shape. 7. Character can be found on the surface of the skull and the relative size and shape of each person's skull. Organs of character, phrenology postulated, include such things as inhibitiveness, continuity, self-esteem, firmness, veneration, benevolence, destructiveness, acquisitiveness. So eugenics also saw the invention of careful measuring tools, a metrology for the science of phrenology. It also introduced well-calibrated maps for keeping track of where individual organs of character were located, as well as maps for comparing one person's skull to the average skull. The science of eugenics depended on the prior 19th century invention of statistics and of the bell curve. For these, scientists needed to take lots of measurements. What we now call the bell curve was used by scientists as a way of dealing with human error in making measurements, actually in making measurements of star position. The problem was that measurements of a star position were not all the same. Indeed, some people said this and some people said that. If measured star positions were plotted on an x-axis and the frequency of any particular measurement was plotted on the y-axis, then the mean measurement was taken to be the true position of the star. Adolf Quetelet was the first to use the normal curve other than as an error law. His studies of the numerical consistency of crimes stimulated wide discussion of free will versus social determinism. For his government, he collected and analyzed statistics on crime, morality, etc., and he devised improvements in census taking. His work produced great controversy among the social scientists of the 19th century. In addition, he measured the average height, chest size, arm length, and height of Belgian army officers. In this way of thinking about distribution, things that don't fall on the mean are errors of measurement. Keeping this particular interpretation in mind, you can see how someone like Quetelet might argue that the mean or average man was the best one, and a difference from that mean was a deviation from the true, the real, and the good. For his part, Francis Galton used the bell curve not to look at errors of measurement, but to look at population distributions. It wasn't the average that concerned him, but the variation. The important thing to note about this was that in his book Hereditary Genius of 1869, the normal or bell curve distribution was assumed, not the result of empirical observation. So although Galton had no problem with statistics or any characteristic ranging from intelligence to height, he assumed that intelligence was normally distributed on a bell curve. And then, knowing the total population of the country, he was able to estimate the number of geniuses and number of people with exceptional stupidity. Yet again, this was not an empirical observation, but an assumption. In 1876, in a study with peas, was Galton's first empirical evidence of a normal distribution of characteristics in a biological population. Yet he still had no data on people. Finally, in 1884, Galton established an anthropometric laboratory at the International Health Exposition. Within a few months, 9,000 people, including parents and their grown children, were measured for height, weight, arm span, breathing power, and so on. On the basis of this data and some collected from questionnaires he had published, Galton found in 1889 that those characteristics followed the same laws of inheritance that he had found in peas. Following phrenology, Galton also argued that behavioral traits might also be visible in the anatomy. He consequently arranged to have a series of photo compositions showing the average facial expression and type of certain professions and certain forms of criminals. The tool here was photography, where criminal or behavioral types are visible in the body. Therefore, this is a form of genetic approach, and it was part of a broader movement. For instance, the leading criminologist of the day, Cesare Lombroso, wrote a book on how visible physical traits are linked to different types of criminal behavior. Lombroso argued that criminal behavior resulted from an incomplete development of moral faculties within the criminal. From this point, Lombroso's chain of logic moved to the argument that incomplete moral development is either caused by or is a symptom of incomplete physical evolution. Criminals may be identified by their characteristic anatomical features, he argued. They have, quote, enormous jaws, high cheekbones, prominent superciliary arches, solitary lines on the palms, extreme size of the orbits, and handle-shaped ears. All of these anatomical features that Lombroso assigned to the criminal, he also assigned to inferior animals. Thus, for Lombroso, criminality is linked to incomplete evolutionary development. These all can be determined by visual inspection.